What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Artful podcast. It's Matteo here, your host. I'm an artist. In this podcast, I talk about art and I have the pleasure to talk and interview some amazing artists. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and check all the links in the descriptions. It's a lot of fun. Stay tuned for the every episode coming out every Monday. And no further ado, guys. Let's go with the studio chat.
I teach at Clemson. I teach art.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so I have some classes that are in person. Like 2 of my classes are in person, 2 are online. So I just had to go in and teach drawing this morning. And now I'm out on my back porch because it's 73 degrees outside. So
yeah, it looks pretty sunny. I call from UK. Yeah, and it's been a couple of days that we had sun and we are like, yes, everyone is try to be out and try to go to the park.
We've been just swamped with rain for like days, and it's supposed to rain all next week as well. So it's not
the same. Yeah.
We have 3 good days. That's it.
Finally a bit of sun. I come across you because big fan of comics. So yeah, and I saw something that really interesting in your work. So I wanted to talk to you about how did you become an artist and anything like that. So
for me, it actually runs in the family.
Okay.
What was funny was all of the females on my mom's side of the family were painters.
Oh,
and we had painters dating back to like the 14th century in our family. But all the males were architects. And I just remember from a very young age just always being exposed to like art. She was always like painting and drawing. And she was a very like loose parent, she like pretty much let us get away with anything. And I always remember it being funny. The only time she was strict with us is if she was drawing us and then we weren't allowed to move. And it's like, you can't get up, like, you have to stay there. Right. So it was something that I was always kind of like, I grew up around. And then at age 10, I was taken from my mother and I had to move to North Carolina, and I lived with my father's side of the family. And I was never really aware of like the family history as a child. So when I moved to North Carolina, when I was in high school, I really got into drafting, and I was contemplating going to school for architecture. And my grandfather found out and was like super excited. And at the last minute, I changed my mind and I went to school for painting. And I like broke the tradition, and he was like super upset. So he didn't speak to me for a while after that. He was like, mad at me. But I just always had felt, more pulled towards, visual arts than I did architecture. And it was one of those things where I absolutely loved, the experience. I loved the school that I went to. I didn't realize how good the school I was when I was in it. And now that I'm in academia and I went to grad school, I realized like, wow, this was like a really big art school. And I did take advantage of it. Like when this is a small thing that, people don't know about me, but I also was a professional wrestler for
that's crazy. I definitely wanted to ask you about that because I was reading online on your bio, and I was like, professional wrestling. That's so interesting.
So I actually was going to wrestling school the same time I was going to school for art. And
so cool.
2 weeks after I graduated college, like I literally left and I was in Canada like wrestling like all summer. And I taught like middle school art for 1 year. And then after that, I never looked back. And I just did like 10 years of wrestling. And I got like really far from the art world. And I didn't do anything for a long time. And then as the wrestling business declined, I was just like looking just for work and I ended up in retail, and I did retail for a long time, and I was like really good at it, but I really hated it. And at a certain point I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I need to like do something I'm passionate about, do something I love. And I went back to like grad school, and it just like at that moment I was like, okay, this is it. I'm like never going back. Like the rest of my life is like art from this point forward. So
that's so
I'm
interesting.
back.
How did you come across the wrestling path? Like, how did you get interested into doing that?
See, that's a funny story too, because when I lived with my mother, it was in Louisville, Kentucky, and everybody I grew up around absolutely hated pro wrestling. And I remember as a kid thinking this is like really dumb, right? And I remember like, and this is like early 80s, like seeing the magazines with the blood and being kind of like grossed out by it. And I'm like, why would anybody do that, right? But then like when I moved to North Carolina, I'm living with my grandparents down there, and there's like one TV, right? And it's like back in the day where I changed the remote, you know, like I'm the remote, and I had to watch whatever they were watching. And they watched wrestling like all the time, like all wrestling. And after a while, you know, like I was like getting into it, and my grandfather hated it because I liked all the bad guys. And he was just like, I can't believe you like this guy. And he's like such a weasel. And I was like, oh my God, he's like so cool, you know? And I was always like a smaller guy, you know, and my grandmother, she would watch me, you know, watching wrestling. And she was like, you better not do that. Like, you know, like you're gonna grow up and you're gonna get hurt. And I was like, I will never do that. Like, I'm too small. That will never happen. And then in college, WCW starts introducing like the Mexican and the Japanese wrestlers, and they're my size, right? They're like my height. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna start working out. And I started working out and like hitting the gym really hard. And I was like researching wrestling schools. My plan was I was going to drop out of school and go move to California and go to a wrestling college out there. And there was another student I was going to school with, and she was like, hey, before you drop out, go talk to this guy. And it was he was like a bouncer at a bar like downtown Greenville, where I went to college at. And it turned out he wrestled as James Poison Ivy, and he was like 6 foot something, 300 pounds. And he was like this really crazy, funny redneck guy. And he would always say, James Poison Ivy, I'm 300 pounds of nuts, guts, and stainless steel, or something like that. And he was not the smartest guy, but he was the funniest guy. Yeah. And he was like, you know, the best guy to be around. And he was like, well, hey, I know these guys. They have a school that's like 30 minutes from here. He's like, before you drop out, just go talk to these guys, and then you can make a decision from there, which is great, because I had like all these people that were like, I was ready to make bad decisions, and they're all like, don't drop out of school. You know? And so I go, and I just got lucky. Like literally it was C.W. Anderson, Shane Helms, the Hardy Boys, like all these guys. And they hadn't like made it big time yet. They were all like a year or two from going up top. And I just happened to get in with like the really good group of guys, because when I was doing it, it was still really like secretive, and you wouldn't know if you were getting bad training or bad advice. So I just like fell in.
I'm guessing it wasn't that popular as well, like as like a mainstream like now. So yeah, you didn't really have the comparison to do bad or good. Like that was it, and that you were doing it.
Yeah, and it was super popular, but I think mainstream is the better term, because there's like a clear-cut path for people now if they want to pursue it, right? Like you do this, and this leads to this, and then WWE has a performance center, and then also like at the time that I'm doing it, like there were very few like small guys. And like for me, like my first year, like every match I had was against Shane Helms, like because me and him were like the only two like in that area. And then other, you know, guys are popping up. But it was tough as a smaller guy. to do it. And I wasn't upset. Like I understood, like, you know, this is the nature of the business, right? Like you're trying to live your life through somebody else who is supposed to be like a superstar. You know, now everybody's 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", right? Yeah. So, but it was super secretive. And I remember my first day I show up, there's like all these like huge guys, and they show me how to bump one time, and they're like, okay, now you do it 20 times. And I hit my head every single time. And then they were like, okay, you want me to show you how to do it now without hitting your head? And I was like, well, now that I have a major concussion, sure. You know? And that was another thing that was different too, right? Like it was tough love. Like, you know, today, you know, the training is very systematic and it's very easy, but back then they beat you up. And that's how you knew if they liked you. If they beat you up and they were really hard on you, they're like, okay, this guy likes me. And I'm
like make you tough and pretend like it, push you to the limits.
So, you know, and it's one of those things that I still miss it every day. I did do some wrestling in 2017, 2018. And then I also did bodybuilding competitions for a while, and just the toll it took on my body. In 2018, I ruptured a disc.
Oh, okay.
And that was it. I couldn't get out of bed for 2 months. I had to get like an epidural. Luckily, I didn't have to have surgery, but I was like,
to go back.
It's over.
It's
over.
It's pretty severe.
Like literally, it's like if I do, you know, something wrong, you know, I could be looking at, you know, being paralyzed from like the waist down because of, you know, that injury. So like now it's just like, you know, I work out, I try to stay healthy, but I don't have any aspirations of, you know, being big or like getting in the wrestling ring anymore or anything like that. But like I do miss it like
that's
all the time.
Crazy. Obviously, I want to talk about your art, but when I read that you were doing professional wrestling, I was like, I need to ask. Like I cannot not ask that. It's
and it's totally okay. It's something that like I don't talk about a lot because like I don't want it to be like kind like I kind of keep it secret because I do teach at the college level, and I'm afraid that like if I talk about it too much, there's just always going to be questions about wrestling and nobody's going to want to learn. So usually I'm trying to like not bring it up. And I know some of my students follow me on social media, so every now and then I might touch on it, but you know, now it's like it's been so far removed that very few people ever even really ask me about it anymore. But I have great memories, and
so that's so interesting. So it's so good. So what's your background in artistics wise? Like did you start studying when you were 18? Later on you said.
Like so I actually went to East Carolina University, and they like basically they have like the foundation program, and then you have to apply to like whatever you want like your emphasis to be, and then you would have like 2 years where you're building my body of work, and then you have like a final show and you like graduate. And when I went in, you know, it was a very different time, right? Because, you know, there's all this talk about like high art versus low art or fine art and crafts, and comic books historically is something that was always kind of like looked down upon. And when I went to, you know, art school in the late, you know, 90s, like I show up and I'm thinking like, I want to go to comic books. And the first time I step in the door, they're like, no, you can't do that here. And it was like, you're going to learn, you know, fine art. And so at that point, I kind of transitioned. I was like, okay, like I'll go into graphic design. And I took like the intro graphic design commercial art class. And I absolutely hated it because a large part of your grade was dependent on presentation. And it was just like matting and ascertaining work. And they're like, if it's not stretched tight enough, you're going to be dropped a letter grade. If there's a hair, you're going to be dropped a letter grade. And I was like, man, I just want to create. And it just felt like really like stifling. So then I ended up in painting. And I'm glad that I did, because I feel like regardless of like whatever you decide to pursue, just having that knowledge of color theory will make you stronger no matter what you decide to do, right? So,
I completely agree. I always talk to people about how strong the basic are, like how important are. If you can do the fundamental, like you can create anything you want. You can become an abstract artist and have no problem. But there is a certain level, like when you really understand the basic of like painting and colors and stuff like that, proportion and all the kind of jam, and it's really important. And it's really curious because how I know you is through like all these amazing like comic cover and stuff like that, and I could have felt like something like really relatable to me, to my artwork, because I'm a painter and quite classic-ish as a painter as well. And I was really curious on like it's really curious that you had such a classic education and then you become a comic artist, and it's really cool. And how did you become a comic artist?
How did I make the switch? So really, like, what happens for me is I was teaching painting in Massachusetts in 2019. It was an all-girls like art camp, and they were like the top 1% of like the US. Like their parents are like top earners, you know. And like literally, like I was teaching 6 days a week, like you're stuck there. And I had just finished grad school in 2018, and I was constantly applying for, you know, art jobs. And what I was finding is like these colleges, there's very little there's very few schools anymore who just want a traditional artist. They're like, you know, we want you to teach traditional drawing and painting and digital drawing and painting. And I really didn't have that background. So like I started, you know, teaching myself these programs. And the way that I approached it was I was like, okay, I don't know the tools, but I know art. So I was like, I'm gonna lean into what I know about color until like I figure out what these tools are. And my painting that I was doing was literally like, it was like really heavy business, right? Like I got really into it was a French philosopher, he's named Guy Debord, and he wrote Society of the Spectacle. And basically it was this idea that it was a critique on capitalism, and he was saying that there's these power structures that mediate our lives through images, and they can manipulate and control our behaviors by the images they show us. So I was creating all these paintings that were kind of like, scared of the internet. They're manipulating you, which is hilarious because I embrace it like so much now.
Yeah.
And, but the thing was, when I was teaching myself these new digital tools, I was like, my painting is way too heavy for this, right? Like I know this is going to be bad. I know I'm going to make mistakes. I need to just like kind of like goof off, right? So I went back to comic books because that was my first love. And then the entire summer I was in Massachusetts. I'm just, anytime I got spare time, I'm practicing learning this stuff. And then there was like this moment that happened. I went to Mass MoCA, and there's an artist, his name is Trent Doyle Hancock. And I go in, and it's this large installation space, and he's literally making like action figures and toys and graphic novels and animation. And it's like this huge space, and it's in this legitimate like art space, right?
Sounds amazing.
And I was like, I don't have to hide this anymore. Like I can be like whoever I want to be. Like this is validation for me. And literally, like, he was an African-American artist from Texas who grew up like in the church, and he created this whole like fictional like graphic novel world to help him process and understand religion that was being like, pressed upon him by his like parents, right? And that's what this transforms into. And for me, it was just like hey, do whatever you want to do. It's totally okay. Just be yourself, be authentic. And so I started putting that stuff out there, because before I was kind of afraid that it would hurt my ability to actually get hired. And then there were a couple of, I think it was like Geek World, United, No More Mutants, Legion of Geeks. There's a couple of like Instagram pages that have large followings that just started sharing my stuff. And I was just like, oh, that's cool. And then the next thing I know, like, I'm just adding followers like crazy. And I was like, what is happening?
Yeah.
You know? And then the next thing I know, people are like messaging me and they're like, hey, do you do commissions? Do you sell prints? And I was like, oh, wow. Like,
I can.
Yeah, sure. You know? And then it dawned on me. I was like, okay, like it never dawned on me before, because like when I was in art school, they gave you no business introduction, right? Like, here's your degree. Like, we hope you make money. Yeah. And then when I went to grad school, it was like, okay, we're going to teach you how to make money. There's two ways you can do it. Either you teach, or you have to be represented by a gallery, and they're going to take 50%. And it never dawned on me that like I could make money on a third alternate channel and cut out the middleman. Like, I literally, like, the first 6 months I posted artwork, like, I tagged Jim Lee on everything because I was trying to get his attention, right? And it never worked. Like, I never got that job. But then, like, you know, people are like, you know, paying me and giving me money for artwork, and it just blew my mind. I never thought that would happen. So then it kind of like clicked, and I was like, well, this is happening on accident. Like, what happens if I really apply myself? And like what I did was, you know, half my time would be creating artwork, and the other half would be like researching Instagram's algorithm. And I really started like putting the two together to kind of like boost my presence and get myself out there. And what I did was I just documented all the research I did for a year. And now like local colleges are like paying me to go give talks to young artists about how do you make money through Instagram.
How you make, that's really interesting. And it changed recently, the whole self-promoting as an artist. And obviously everyone's really new at this, especially as an artist. And it's not being taught at all in schools that it can be this other way. Like, it might be harder for most of the time, but you can make a living on your own and promoting yourself, because there are all these free platforms that you can just post and describe what you do and try to create an audience, and that audience will pay at some point your artwork. And it's really, it's really true, and it's missing for sure in this, like in the schools right now.
Well, and I think the problem is, and what's great about like Clemson is they're really like open to this, right? And they're wanting me to like push this even further. But I think the problem is that you have so many people that are still in this old school way of thinking that like promoting yourself and selling artwork is dirty, right? It's almost like punk music, right? Like punk music is only cool until you get famous, and then once you're famous, nobody likes you anymore, right? And it's like always been like this dirty thing that if you make money or promote yourself in art, then it's not like legitimate real art. And I think people are slowly, you know, realizing that we receive information differently now, and it's not the same playing field it used to be. And if you don't embrace it, you're going to be left behind, for sure. I actually feel like I got in too late.
I do feel the same. I started doing YouTube way too late. Around 13 years later. nothing.
I still haven't got on YouTube.
And definitely social media. At the beginning, I always saw the social media thing as, it's just a stupid thing. People just put like food on it, cats, and that kind of things. It's not really a business model. But then obviously if you use it as one, it can be, for sure. Like that's such so stupid thinking right now, like in this age, to not use social media to grow your audience. It's mental, because it helps a lot. Even just like to find other people to talk to. It's literally like why I start this is because I follow a lot of artists, and because that's what I'm interested to, and I wanted to talk to people, and I love podcasts, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna start one, and slowly I'm trying to make it better and everything. And I met people that are all over the place, all over the world, and it's so much fun, and without social media I could never do that.
Well, and here's my theory about like art, right? Because I mentioned earlier that was creating paintings that were like beware of the internet, right? Because it's this toxic place. But like I feel like, you know, like the human language, we don't really have like a lot of words that that describe us being genuinely happy for somebody else's success, right? Like we have jealousy and envy, and we have all these words to describe like when we're unhappy with somebody being successful. But I feel like the art world is the one place that has a really good community on social media, because we're just excited to see cool stuff. Like if somebody else is doing something that's great, like you want to share that and be like, you guys have got to see this stuff is good. And other artists are so good at promoting like other artists. And I think it's a really, you know, strong community. And I have like a lot of friends that like I've never met in person, but it's all through, you know, social media, and it's like a shared like love of art. So, you know, I can say that, you know, some of my initial, you know, reservations about using social media like were wrong, because it has been a good, you know, place for me to not just promote myself and my artwork, but develop relationships as well.
That's definitely the case. Did your practice change through the time? So do you still doing paintings, or something that you're not doing anymore just because you love comics and you're doing so well in comics that you're not doing it?
So like two things. Like one, I did like go just kind of like full on comics for like a year, because it was part of the research I was doing just to see like how can I make Instagram work if I gave it 100%. The second thing is, I was living in like Hilton Head, South Carolina, and I had like a much larger house. And then I decided to go to grad school, and I was like, okay, we're going to sell our home. We're going to buy a much smaller home. I went from like 2,000 square feet to like 1,400 square feet. And I never thought about studio space until I graduated, right? Because the entire time I'm in grad school, I had, you know, the studio space on campus. And then once I graduated, I was like, I don't have a space to paint, right? Yeah. And I was trying to paint in my garage, but in South Carolina, it's like during the summer, it's so hot. Like you can't be outside and paint in the garage. And then in the winter, it'd be so cold. And I don't have room in the house. And then the other thing is I wouldn't necessarily want to paint in the house anyway, because, you know, if you work with paints, it never comes out, you know? And I looked at like studio space here locally, but it was just like so expensive. Like I couldn't justify paying it at the time. So now, like maybe this year, potentially maybe I'll get some studio space, or we're thinking about buying a larger house so I can get back into the painting. But like painting is one of those things where like you have to have the setup easily accessible in order to like kind of like pop in and pop out whenever you need to. It can't, it's really not one of those monsters where you can be like, oh, I'm just going to dig everything out and like paint. And
it's so true. Yeah. I don't have a space right now, obviously because of COVID and the whole situation. I tend to draw a lot more because of the space. Even if I want to do like bigger scale drawing, like I can do it without making so much mess and moving stuff around. If I want to do a big painting, it's going to take like a lot of space in the living room, and it's my girlfriend will not be happy about it.
And my thing is, I don't like to paint unless I'm painting big. Like I do not like to paint small, you know, like transitioning to digital was hard working on.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can imagine, like it's all like on a screen, and it's such a different. I tried so many times because I have like a little tablet, and I tried digital. It's just the feeling so much different. I will definitely get used to at some point, but yeah, I still prefer the pen, the ink, and the whole like old school kind of vibe. But yeah, something that's such an amazing tool that if you can use it, you can definitely do it. I was having some problem on putting down some drawings lately, and the only way I could do it, I don't know why, it just felt right. I did it digitally. Starting from an actual drawing and then scanning the whole thing. But the result, it was what I was looking for, the digital version, and I was like, oh, see, like if you there is definitely like a use you can do this with. And
what program are you using?
Oh, I don't even remember, to be honest. It's definitely like one of the cheapest program. It's just like, you know, to try out and to see how it works, how the whole thing works. But yeah, so big fan of comics. You jump into this comic world recently, if I didn't get it wrong, like literally, like was it like this last couple of years?
Like November 2019 is kind of when it started. So it's been a little more than a year, maybe a year and 4 months.
And there is so much happening in the comic world as well. Like I can imagine, like you have so much work you can do in your mind, especially now with the Snyder Cut coming out. So like it's always moving, especially like lately with these big movies they did, and they managed to do like really big and good movies about comics, because before, in early 20s, like in early 2000, like there really wasn't a good comic movie.
Exactly.
But now they are on the roll, they are doing amazing work. And yeah, I'm just curious, like how do you approach what to do, and is that because you kind of relate to the movies, and you kind of relate to what is going on in the comic world, and then you do your work to be relevant, or you just go with your gut and whatever you like you do?
So you know, it's kind of like you know, it's interesting, like, because you were talking about how your practice had changed because of COVID, right? And COVID was impacting on my practice because basically when I was looking at like how do I, you know, provide content on Instagram, like what am I going to provide? That was the first thing that I was trying to figure out. And the second thing I was going to figure out was like, you know, okay, you know, how do I do this? What am I going to do? But I also have to like be unique and stand out. And, you know, my paintings, like physical paintings, were about creating a world that existed somewhere between the physical and the digital that was a better representation of how we actually receive and experience like information today, right? So there was like this world that existed between two. And I was like, well, what if I take like same, you know, theory and apply it to comics and live action? And I was like, what if I can create a world that exists between comics and the live action movies and provide fans with moments that they feel like they've been cheated of? Because you know, there are a lot of movies that are out there, but DC Comics has been one that is just like constantly in flux, and it's like this is canceled, or this is canceled, or this person's being recast. And I just felt like there was a lot of like really like missed opportunities that fans wanted and they didn't get. And I was like, you know, there's no new movies coming out. There's no new TVs. Everybody's like stuck at home and they're just like dying for content. And I was like, the best thing I can do is just like crank out work all day, every day, and just try to provide, you know, fans with just like a glimpse of what that moment may have been like. And, you know, what I found was like, that was always like my approach. So it was like, you know, let's look at old comic book covers. and see like, okay, what happens when you put Ben Affleck Batman with, you know, Stephen Amell like Green Arrow, you know. And that was like my original approach. And you know, I was always a fan, like obviously, like, and I'm sure everybody knows, like I was always a huge like Frank Miller Batman fan, Frank Miller, you know, Daredevil fan. So I always had like the things that I would go to, and I was a big fan of, even though a lot of people didn't like it, the Batman versus Superman movie. Like I thought Ben Affleck's Batman was just like spot on, and I was doing a lot of that work. And then what happened was a lot of the people who were reaching out to me were people who were trying to make the Snyder Cut happen, and they were commissioning me to almost do like propaganda posters to drive interest.
Oh, that's so interesting. There is nothing more dedicated a comic fan. Like they will do anything in the world, anything in the world to make something happen. That's so that's so true.
Yeah. And like there was like a handful of guys that like every month they were ordering like 3 or 4 commissions from me, and it was specifically like, I need this type of Snyder Cut poster, and we're going to put it out there and put this information out. And, you know, and I was really excited about that because it was something that like I enjoyed. And as long as it's like authentic and I enjoy it, then I can like run with it. And like a lot of the commissions I do today, like one of the most recent ones that was like awesome was the canceled Batman by Darren Aronofsky. The guy like approached me and he was like, hey, I want like 1 poster. And I was like, I've got 20 ideas and I'm going to do them all. You know? So like, you know, sometimes I love it. Like when somebody comes to me and they have a great idea, and then all of a sudden the wheels start turning and I'm like, okay, we're going to do all this and you're going to get way more than your money's worth out of this. You know, because sometimes I get commissions and I'm like, great, I can do that for you. But I'm just like, oh, I don't want to do that. You know? So, but the thing I always go back to is if I love it and I want to see it, there's probably other people that want to see it too. And that's usually like the best thing to kind of like stick with when you're trying to figure out like what content do I want to put up there.
How much editing do you do on a single piece? So do you compose the whole page first and then elaborate, or you do piece by piece and try to connect the whole pieces between all of them?
So like a lot of times, and if it's like if I'm working with somebody, typically I'll do anywhere between 3 to 5 sketches, and like I'll send them over to them and be like, hey, what do you like? And I always do a trick. If there's one that I really like I'll go ahead and add color to it.
Make it stand out.
Yeah, it always works. But I'll send them, you know, 3 to 5 sketches over, and usually they're all going to be sketches that like I'm super interested in. Like I won't send anything that I don't like. I have friends that'll be like, oh, I'll send these sketches. Of course, they pick the one that I don't like, and I'm like, why do you send it? Like, don't do that, right? So they're all things that like I like, and if I have the time and I'm really interested in it, like I'll go ahead and finish those other things like out anyway. But it also depends too on like, you know, things that I'm, you know, like how passionate am I about it? Like obviously Batman. I was always a huge Star Wars fan. I was like dead in the water for a long time, and then Mandalorian just like knocked it out of the park with season 2. And like I was like, I gotta create Star Wars art, and I still like have a bunch that I want to do, you know, but it's like just don't have enough time. But you know, it just like I always just think about, I guess in my mind I'm thinking about like if I can make it real in my mind, then I can make that happen somehow, you know, like artistically. And that's really what I'm, you know, more interested in, is like the idea. And a lot of times, like if I have a commission and somebody like comes to me with this great idea, like I even credit them as, you know, the artist, because the art is the idea, you know. It's not necessarily what you make, but it's the idea behind it. So a lot of the guys have gotten work from me, like I've credited them and I'll say, hey, I can't take credit for this. This is all this guy's idea. because I did the Gray Ghost ones recently, and somebody was like, "Oh, this is amazing, and you did such a great job." And I was like, "Man, I can't take credit for this." You know, somebody came.
It's good. That's honest, and yeah, that's not many people would do that. That's
no, like I'm just like they came to me, and I was like, "Hey, like, you know, why do you want this?" And they were very specific about like actors they wanted or whatever. And I was like, "Man, this is like great." And then it like encourages me to like do more research like on that and like learn about it. Like the DC Universe app is great because if anybody like approaches me with something I don't know about, I'm like, oh, I'll go read it.
Yeah.
So it happens periodically, but like I like it because then it takes me down a different thread and I learn something.
Do you ever start your sketching with pencil, or is it just you go digital straight away?
I just go digital like right away, but I switch between the tools, right? So like if I'm actually like sketching, like I'll use like the pencil, and then if I'm going to something finished, I'll go towards like the inking, like brushes or whatever. I think that's the great thing. Like, I hate to say it, but it's just digital is just so much easier. Like I imported. Like I bought like 50 brushes and they're just like all these different textures, and people are like, how do you get those textures? I'm like, dude, it's so random. I just pick a random brush and it does it for me.
Just what it looks like. I just go with it.
It looks good. It can stand. So there's just so much stuff that is just like so much easier, with it. So I just, and it's all housed in like one little device. It's easy to, I guess the thing that I like the most about it is just like, I don't have to photograph artwork. Like I am not a photographer.
Yeah.
And,
it's really hard.
Yeah. When I was in grad school, they're like, hey, you're going to have to pay like a professional photographer to, photograph your work when you apply for jobs. And I was like, oh, but when I do digital, like literally, like I put it out there and it looks exactly the way I created it. So that is another thing that is like super enticing for me to work digitally, but I am not a photographer.
Yeah, it's so hard. Just because the color will never be the same. Like
yes,
it's always gonna be different because the photo is different from the actual pigment of the color.
Yeah,
and it just make me want to try even more like digital art and give it a go, like just for a year and doing digital and try it.
Well, and what I was gonna recommend, like I asked, like what program you were using earlier, and so like I do all my work on iPad Pro, and I use Procreate, and I had like Photoshop for the iPad, and it's really good, but it's not full Photoshop. And I just recently got a Mac, and I downloaded full Photoshop and Illustrator, and I'm teaching myself Illustrator, and I hate it.
Yeah.
But Procreate is the closest thing to just traditional drawing. And that's why I like gravitated towards it, because, when you're using the iPad Pro and you're using the pencil and you're using Procreate, like I feel like Photoshop and Illustrator, like you really have to understand the layout and the functions, and you have to like understand the entire layout to know like what you're doing. Whereas Procreate, it's very intuitive, and you can just start drawing, and your work gets better as you learn the tools. You don't have to know like every single tool. So, and it's only $30, and you can import brushes and type, and they constantly are updating it. It's a really powerful, platform that I think is just a natural transition for traditional artists.
If you want to go digital, that would be it. From a traditional.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the more that I learned about Photoshop and Illustrator, I learned that, Procreate can do those same things. I just have to figure out like where it's at, like it can do, clipping mask and transparencies, and, it can do like all these things. I just had to figure out like where they were. So like I would literally like teach myself Photoshop and do online classes, and they were like, oh, this is a clipping layer. And I was like, oh, I wonder if Procreate has it. I'm like, oh, they do.
They do.
And then I found it out like 6 months later after I've been using it for 6 months. So So but I do think like if you're a traditional artist and you want to make that jump, it just feels more natural. The illustrators, like on the vector, it's vector art, so it's like always on this like structured like, you know, platform. And when I first started learning it, it was like all these like squares and boxes. They're like, oh, we're gonna draw with squares and boxes today. And I was like, oh, I do not want to do this. Not at all. So I'm not an expert with Illustrator or Photoshop yet, so I'm still playing with them, I'm still learning them. And the only reason I'm doing it is just because I teach at the college level, and I feel like I need to know those tools in order to teach students. But if it's up to me, like, I'm just going to stay with Procreate.
Procreate for sure. I do use Photoshop, but it's more like I have a background as a graphic design for like logos and like merchandise, stuff like that, which is good for a certain level if you want to draw and if you want to move stuff around. I would never recommend Photoshop to like create art. It's really different. And Illustrator, I have no idea. I tried, I think, a couple of times ages ago, but you need to be on it all the time, because they always update, they always change stuff, and so, and it just doesn't feel natural. It just doesn't feel like the same thing. And if there is a program, Procreate, you said, helps that transition. I think for artists, like for classic artists, it's definitely like a good use of the program, because it will help you. But,
and even just like the brushes, right? Like you spend time learning with the brushes and like airbrushing. They have like acrylic, like artistic, and then you figure out like what all these different things can do. And then they're able to create, you know, different like textures and effects, kind of like I was mentioning. So, and one of the things I've really been doing lately, you know, like when you start painting, like a really good thing to do in order to understand color is like a limited palette. And I would set up like a limited palette. Like I would use maybe like, you know, warm and cool greens, warm and cool reds, and then like a white, right? Well, with Procreate, a lot of what I've been doing lately is I do like an underpainting. Like I'll do a complete like, you know, monochromatic value like drawing. And then what I do is I put two color layers underneath it. So I'll do like a green and a red. And then I start like erasing with like different like paint brushes, and like let the green come through on the red. And I do like a very like limited palette, and it's almost like more of like a reductive drawing. And then maybe go on top and layer color on top of that red. And then everything has kind of like a consistent, kind of like harmonious kind of like palette, but you're still working with this very like limited, you know, palette to kind of help you understand color and like learn the tools. So that's something I've done a lot recently.
Yeah, it's definitely like something, it sounds like really close to like a normal way of painting. Like that's what you literally do most of the time. You paint and you put stuff on, you take it off. It's just like you move paint around and until you get what you like. And I can definitely see, like, obviously your path as classic artist becoming a digital artist as well, and you using those tools and those understanding to make amazing digital artwork. That's and I definitely can see it. That's why I think I've been drawn to your artwork when I was on Instagram, because there was something, and it now makes more sense if you tell me like you had this classic education and then become a digital artist as well, because there is so much digital, especially on the comics aspect. There is a lot of people doing digital, and it always seems too two-dimensional, like too flat. But with yours, it doesn't, and it makes sense why now. Because
and the other thing I do too that I caught a lot of heat from, I never use black. And I had like, you know, some followers that are like, why do you not use black? And I was like, because black flattens space. And they just like did not understand that, you know. So it may look super dark, but trust me, it's blue or purple or green. It is not black.
Yeah, it's true. Now you make me thinking. Batman, you never make Batman like actual black, and most of the time people do black straight on.
Yeah.
True. Now you make me think. I will definitely notice that now.
Cat's out of the bag.
I've got to ask what your favorite character, like your comic art character.
Like my favorite character, you know, like I absolutely, I mean, Batman has got to be it. And I mean, ever since I was a kid, and it's funny to me, like one of my favorite things to do is actually make Adam West Batman cool. Like, you know, and it's like little tricks, or like make the ears pointier. He had like the little like curly, like round eyebrows, just make them sharp and edgy, and then drop his color palette and make it darker. And now all of a sudden he's cool and contemporary. And like, to me, it's like fun to take something that was like, this is my first introduction to Batman, and it was like super campy, and you couldn't do it today. But then I can do Adam West and I can give it to somebody and they're like, man, that's like so cool and dark and edgy. And it's just like little things, you know, instead of using a soft line, use a hard edge.
You can play with it.
Drop the value a little bit. And automatically, like, you put, you know, Adam West in a new context and people are, you know, easily accepting it. So he was always my favorite. Daredevil was always a huge one.
I love Daredevil.
Huge X-Men fan. From like when I was a kid, it was like Fall of the Mutants is like when I got in on it. And I'm a huge like Mark Silvestri fan. Like that whole run, like him and Chris Claremont. Like for me as a kid, it was great because they were literally tackling racism without just coming out and saying it was racism, like years before anybody else was, right? And like, you know, the whole like looking down on mutants, I mean, that's what they were doing. And it was just so fantastic. And it'll always be something that resonate with me. And then anything Mike Mignola does, like, I think is fantastic. I like all those guys, right? Like, Miller, Mike Mignola, John Romita Jr., like all of them, they have that kind of like blocky style. Like to me, that's like,
definitely like on the dark side.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I was always more of I was a Marvel fan growing up. I absolutely love Batman. Batman was always my favorite, but I was always a Marvel fan, like growing up. But I found that when I started doing stuff, that I felt like the DC comic fans were just like way more appreciative and way more passionate about their characters, because the Marvel comics are just saturated. There's so much fan art out there that like you take it for granted. And I think so, yeah. And then you put out the DC stuff and they're like, oh, this is great, and they're super excited about it. You know, I always kept up with Batman, but then I got the DC Universe app and just started like reading a lot of the other stuff, so I was kind of aware of it. And a lot of times I think fans are just like way too critical of the live action adaptations. And like for me, like I thought the Titans show was great, and everybody was like, oh, Titans are terrible. And I was like, well, I don't know anything about Titans, and you just showed me Robin just like destroying this guy and rubbing his face across the broken window.
Oh, that moment when he said "fuck Batman," it was amazing. I
was like so excited. I was like, and like for me, like, you know, like I think of it in terms of everybody's like, oh, well, it's not like the comics, not like the comics. And I'm like, well, every time you have a new writer,
it's a different approach for sure. Yeah,
different approach. And I just feel like this is somebody else's different approach. And I try to, you know, think of it in terms of, what would it really be like if you did that? Like if you were this vigilante crime fighter, and it would be violent and it would change you, you know? And I think they're like highlighting that aspect, you know? You're not going to kill a guy, but how are you going to stop him from, you know, molesting children again? Like, I'm going to almost kill you.
You remember.
I
think that the DC it's more they're really good on making it more real and more cruel, and they're talking about like superhero and something like that's fun, like it's a fantasy. But Marvel, it's always like, I think it's always because they're under Disney now. So Disney, it's always more approach for like teenager kids and young adults. Like it's not But DC, they always go deeper and be like, okay, this is for kids technically, but I will give the adult audience like what they want, because that's what you want as an adult. Like, it's not gonna be flowers and powers all the time. It will be blood at some point, and it will be a fight in a dark alley saying fuck Batman at some point.
Yeah, and it's funny to me too, because I think they switched at some point, right? Because I remember, like, as a kid thinking DC was campy superhero type stuff, and like Marvel was dark.
Yeah,
and then
especially in the costume. Before they were like more like they were more like what's the word? Like the Wolverine costume, it was the yellow and blue, like super, like punch in the eye. The whole X-Men, they were like so well, when you watch the first I was actually watching recently on Disney Plus the X-Men, the classic cartoon, and it was so colorful and so like flashy and all the kind of things. So now it become the opposite, the way around, and it was good. And another question I wanted to ask, superpower, what superpower would you like?
Oh man, that's tough, man. It's funny, my gut reaction is like, I just want Batman's superpower. I just want to be rich, but but I don't want to waste
make your own superpower.
I don't want to waste it. Man, like, honestly, if I really had to go, and this might surprise people, telepathy. Like, I was just like, Jean Grey, Professor X. Like, I just feel like there's so much, to that. Like, I don't have to turn invisible. I can make you think I'm invisible.
Good pick.
There's a lot of good powers out there. I think I'd have to go telepathy. So.
Definitely a good pick.
Yeah.
Anyway,
good question.
I definitely want to say thank you to be part of the podcast, and thank you for your time. I don't want to take it too long, and it was a pleasure. Super
awesome.
Fun.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Good talking to you.
Thank you.